I was his wife for 93 nights. No wedding, no certificate. Just a look and a sentence he threw out in front of the entire block. From now on, anyone who touches her, I'll treat it like they bled my own blood. And no one dared to touch me after that. I slept in his cell. There was no locked door, just his shoulder broad enough for me to lean against, without feeling a chill down my spine. I washed his clothes. I wiped his blood after each time he came back from a settling. I knew where he hurt when he clenched up, and the places he pretended not to hurt, so no one would think he was weak. I was a wife in a world where love was not allowed to be spoken, and death always sat quietly behind a nod. On the 94th night, I was ordered to kill him. No violence, just a syringe one that would stop a heart for 11 minutes. No trace, no reaction. Just do it while he sleeps. The system would handle the rest. The problem was he knew. He had known before the 93rd night, and he let me. Not because he thought I would spare him, but because he wanted to see whether I would flinch, whether I loved him enough to betray the reason I existed. You don't need to tell me who you were before you got here, he said. Just decide who you'll keep in your final night. And now the 94th night hasn't ended, because I haven't injected him. And he's still waiting. I was brought into Block G at 1:08 a.m. No orientation, no briefing. Just a 140-kilogram steel door swinging open and a guard throwing my bag onto the concrete floor. Cold, hard. No sound lasted more than 4 seconds before being swallowed by the thick silence. His name was Grant Morrow. Everyone called him the Butcher. Not because of a job, but because no one he handled ever came back whole enough to talk about it. He was the only man who had forced 3 rival gangs in the prison to sit at the same table just to agree on one rule: no one touches him before 4 p.m. And now, I was assigned to his cell. I used to be a soldier, trained to keep my heart rate under 70 even with a gun to my head, taught to control my scent, my blink rate, even the moisture on my palms. I was a fully formed identity monitoring unit implanted into this prison as an invisible eye. My function flagged behavioral anomalies, analyze violent tendencies, report before things spiral out of control. I thought I was just a tool, until the door locked behind me and I heard his voice. Not a growl, not a threat, just like a soft blade step lightly. Floors slick there. Blood. Mine. I froze, and that's when he grabbed my wrist. He didn't squeeze, didn't pull, just touched me. A touch soft enough to transmit something I'd never been trained to interpret, not violence, but not safety either. Just one thing I had been seen. He said, "You're shaking," like someone who's never been touched without a purpose. I didn't know what the correct response was. I couldn't recall any protocol for handling a moment like that. I just stood still, as if I didn't need to pretend I didn't feel anymore. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer a tool. I was a person. The only person he chose to touch, not for control, but because he saw something in me even weaker than loyalty, loneliness. He didn't touch me after the first night, didn't ask my name, didn't pry. Not a single threat, though I knew all it would take was him saying, "Get out," and I'd be hanging upside down from the 3rd floor with no one coming to help. But he didn't do that. He just sat there, bare-chested. Bandages peeling off his shoulder and a long scar that looked like someone had once tried to rip him out of his own body. He shaved his head, but left his eyebrows. Not for looks. Just to keep the gaze that cut like a blade. I ate my first meal in that cell with the feeling this is my final mission. Make him trust. Get close enough to throw him off balance, then send the data out. End it. But 9 nights passed. He didn't walk into the trap. He didn't trust me. But he didn't push me away either. He just watched. like I was stepping into something he'd already seen and chose not to warn me about. I started asking questions not in the report but in my head. If I was the trap, why didn't he take the bait? Or maybe I was the one stepping into something no one ever trained me for, a gaze that wasn't love, but also wasn't control. Just enough to make me feel like I wasn't a machine anymore. On the 10th night, he said my name. My real name. The one not listed on my inmate file. The one buried in layers of cover stories. He looked at me like he had seen me before I even existed here and said, "You know why I haven't touched you again? Because the only person who ever touched me without fear died believing I'd never betray her." I didn't know how to respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because for the first time I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd say something that didn't belong to the mission. I'd become a person, no longer a tool. Then he stepped closer. Not too close. Not enough to touch. Just close enough to say something I had never been trained to handle. "Stop trying to throw me off. You don't have to. I've been off balance since the moment I saw you, and realized you don't know how to be loved without pretending." Day 10 report. File code T3112ZD. Subject Grant Morrow. Observation level. Close proximity, shared sleep, shared meals, verbal exposure, level 3. Directive: submit initial report before midnight. Confirm whether subject exhibits signs of internal structure deviation. I typed the first line. Subject has not displayed violent behavior. Maintains minimal interaction. No evidence of emotional linkage beyond protocol threshold. I continued with the second line. 1 physical contact, non-injurious. Verbal engagement, non-threatening. I paused. The cursor blinked at the next line where I was supposed to write, but shows signs of being easily manipulated. I couldn't type it. Because the truth was, I couldn't manipulate him, and I no longer wanted to. Because when I lay next to him on the 8th night awake, I realized something: he never fell asleep before me but always pretended to so I could fall asleep first. No one trained him to do that. No one told him to. Only someone who knew they were no longer considered human but still chose to hold on to old kindnesses would do something like that. As if someone out there still deserved not to lose sleep out of fear. I stepped away from the terminal. I didn't send the report. I didn't delete it either. I just saved it under a code no one else would recognize, no longer a subject. The next day, I dug into the old Genesis system archive, the one used to develop early emotional regulation models. His name was in there. Not as a prisoner, but as a prototype. Prototype G07, experiment in emotional freezing through violence-based reverse conditioning. What did that mean? It meant he wasn't born this way. He was made to react like an animal, beaten to suppress instinct, drugged to confuse control, fed false memories so that whenever he felt anything, no one would believe it was real. I watched him again that night, cleaning his wounds after a fight no one intervened in. He didn't groan. He didn't curse. He just pressed a bandage to his shoulder and said, as if he knew I'd read everything, "You think I was born like this? No. I once cried over a dead mouse. They called that a malfunction. Then they trained me to be stable. Only when I no longer needed anyone to die was I considered stable. No one ever kept me, because I had feelings, only because I knew when to hide them." I opened the unlinked note file. It wasn't connected to the central system. It wasn't encrypted. Just a blank file, one that had never been touched since I was planted in this prison. Every embedded supervisor was given one. Just in case, if we discovered something outside the behavioral framework, we could write to ourselves a kind of memory outside the mission. No one ever used it. No one dared. I started writing. Day 11. Grant Morrow entity G07 was seen by me today, not through his behavior, but through an act smaller than punishment. I recorded the scene not by algorithm but through unstructured memory. He was scraping dried blood off his own finger leaning against the wall, while Zeke, a young inmate prone to panic attacks, was screaming in the next cell. Everyone ignored it. Because Zeke was a broken model pushed down here to deteriorate on his own. Grant stood up. He didn't ask me. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't say a word. He just stepped into the next cell, used his bloodied finger to draw a circle on the wall. Zeke stopped screaming, sat down, then added 2 dots. His eyes lit up like a child's. A smiley face, crude, blood-stained. But it kept Zeke silent for 4 straight hours, I wrote. He didn't comfort. He didn't soothe. He just gave Zeke something Zeke had never seen in the mirror, a face that could smile even if it was made of blood. I didn't know why my hands shook as I wrote. Maybe because it was the first time I was recording a memory not meant to incriminate, not meant as evidence, not meant for resolution. Just to remember he had a moment where he chose not to hurt, despite being more wounded than anyone else. I saved the file, named it Him as Human. That night, Grant looked at me. He didn't ask what I'd written. He just sat down back to back with me and said, like he was reminding himself, I'm not good. I'm just tired. And when I'm tired, I don't want anyone crying because of me anymore. You don't need to understand. Just remember I could have hurt someone, but today I didn't. I don't know who leaked the file. I had saved it to an offline drive, not connected to the system, not transmitted anywhere, just to keep. Yet 4 hours after I finished writing it, it appeared on Tier 3 protocol, sent directly to the surveillance network. No signature, no sender. Just a description: subject exhibits emotional behavior. Potentially dangerous due to unquantifiable responses. Recommend urgent containment. When Grant was summoned to the isolation unit, I wasn't allowed to follow. Wasn't allowed to ask. Wasn't even told where he was taken. I searched the system dashboard and saw he'd been flagged suspicious model. Cold beauty classification. That means too composed, too moving, a psychological liability. Remove before others get emotionally compromised. I've seen people erased for loving, or simply for being loved. I thought Grant would lash out, smash the table roar like they all warned, push him to a corner, and no one walks out alive. But he didn't. The interrogation room was cold, mirrors fogged. 2 officers questioned him. Grant just sat there, calm, not defensive, not resigned. Just once he looked straight into the camera, as if he were recording a final testament, not an answer. I know someone's listening, he said. Maybe it's you, the one who wrote that line. I'm not asking who leaked it. I'm not angry. I just want to say, if you're planning to wipe me from the system at least, know this: I once held back. I once did something unnecessary, just so a kid wouldn't claw his chest open out of fear of the voices in his head. I'm not a good man. But don't write me off as only violent. I'm not asking for mercy. I just don't want to be erased without someone knowing I did one thing that wasn't terrible. And then the story bent. As Grant exited the interrogation room, a scrambled signal flooded the system. It didn't come from inside the prison. It wasn't a hacker. It was from an old monitor codename Delta Zero, someone who had shadowed Grant during the original G07 experiment. And he had just released raw footage from 7 years ago, the moment Grant was forced to kill the mouse he had raised himself. 6:43 a.m. Cell Block G, Central Corridor. The entire facility's light simulation was shut down. Display screens went dark. Internal signals shifted into a silent emergency state. No one knew where the video came from. No sender trace. No metadata. Just a 17-second clip looping across every screen in the prison. A boy Grant, maybe 12, sat, clutching a white mouse in his arms, crying without sound. A gloved hand pushed a syringe toward him. A woman's voice, soft and composed, said, "If you want to be kept, you have to do what the others did." Grant cried, but his hand didn't tremble. He injected, not the mouse, himself, a distraction. Blood spilled. No one stopped him. The video cut off just before his body hit the cold lab floor, and no one ran to him. After the clip ended, for the next 60 minutes, no inmate showed up on the yard. No one picked fights. No one asked for meds. Zeke, the panic-prone boy, was the first to write on the wall using coffee. "I'm still alive because someone once drew a smiley face in blood for me." Next came Lomo, a knife for hire once beaten by Grant, standing in the middle of the corridor, lifting his shirt to show a scar on his abdomen and yelling. I cursed him. I tried to stab him. He didn't stab back. He just looked at me and said, "You're mad about something that isn't me. I don't want you to regret this." Then he walked away. I didn't understand, but since that day, I haven't touched a blade. The third person was me. I didn't speak. I just opened my private journal and read aloud one line I'd written him as human. By 9:00 a.m., the system flagged abnormal behavior. 45 inmates voluntarily skipped breakfast. 15 lined up outside Grant's cell without instruction. 8 handwritten notes submitted, not asking for pardon, not begging for release, just one sentence repeated. He once held me back, no one knew. I just don't want him to disappear without anyone remembering. Kaylin sent an internal message to Veronica. The system designed him to control through fear. But now he's managing the most dangerous inmates with something we never trained into him: forbidden kindness. 10:42 a.m., internal surveillance chamber. The facility's full biological map shifted to status: collective emotional instability. Unprecedented type. Veronica was summoned. Not to debate, but to witness. We can't let a psychologically divergent entity become the center of influence. Grant Morrow is no longer an individual. He's an anchor point. And if the anchor isn't removed, the rules will drift. The system's proposed solution was clinical: eliminate Grant using a silent nighttime oxygen suppression protocol. Deploy an artificial replica model G07 mirror coded to mimic Grant's behavior minus the disobedient will. Update the system registry to reflect Grant was not terminated, merely transferred to a special unit. Veronica didn't respond immediately. She asked one question. And if the replica gets discovered, it won't, they said. They don't need the real man. They only need a symbol. But while the meeting spun behind closed doors, something unexpected ignited across the compound. Zeke, the panic-prone boy Grant once saved, was thrown into isolation for writing on a wall, "If he disappears, I'll disappear too." That night, Zeke sliced off part of his ear and wrote in blood on the concrete floor, "You held me. Now I hold you with something the system can't erase: real pain." The prison convulsed. For the first time, someone once deemed broken triggered a chain reaction without needing anyone's permission. At 6:00 a.m. the next morning, the Grant replica was deployed. But when he stepped onto the training yard, the inmates stared at him for exactly 4 seconds, then turned their backs. No words were needed. They knew. That wasn't him. Because he didn't look at anyone with eyes that had known pain. Kaylin sent an emergency message to Veronica. We didn't fail because he was dangerous. We failed because no one wants to keep a system that couldn't keep even one person who knew how to hold someone else for no reason at all. Isolation Sector K, Room 9. A prisoner marked mute vocal cord trauma had never participated in any activity for the past 3 years. No speech, no writing. No one even called his name. He had only a code, K13. The day Grant disappeared, K13 injected his own shoulder to get admitted to the infirmary. While the Grant replica was walking onto the yard, K13 scribbled something by hand on a sterile gauze pad, handed it to a nurse, and smiled to himself. I had a chance to stab him 7 years ago. He looked at me, said just one thing. I don't need you to believe I'm good. I just need you not to become me. I dropped the knife. He let go of my wrist. He kept me alive. Now it's my turn to hold on to the part of his life he saved. On K13's left wrist was an outdated microchip, the kind only issued to former technical insiders during the early experimental era. That chip still held access to the deepest tier Genesis core, the Origin Vault, storing every emotional prototype memory erasure protocol and the deletion logs of Z units labeled emotionally compromised. Kalen received an alert, a root login pinged Genesis core. No password, just a single biometric verification. The only person whose DNA was still authorized was Grant, or someone Grant had once spared and to whom he had quietly handed the keys. K13 sent a single command through the entire system: return Grant or I open Genesis. No threats. Just this: if I'm still here, then so is the truth. The council panicked. Not because K13 had a weapon, but because if Genesis was breached, every death once labeled suicide, every sudden collapse in solitary, every emotional failure would surface with names, timestamps, supervising officers, and every memory they thought erased would swarm back like bees finding their old hive. Veronica found Kalen. Her voice was quieter than the question it carried. If the system agrees to back down, can we really bring Grant back? Kalen looked at her. You taught the system how to erase a person. Now it's time you teach it how to keep one. Not because he was obedient, but because if someone like him doesn't get to stay, then none of us deserve to be called human. 1:39 a.m., the deepest level of the Reconstruction Sector Module D. The door wasn't locked by a password. It was locked by intent biometric encryption and an internal signal chain. Veronica, one of only 3 individuals ever granted override access, had written the protocol herself. She didn't tell anyone. No alert, no clearance request. She brought only a signal scrambling device and a cloned Genesis drive one never issued to anyone outside the Central Council. Room 07. Behind a clouded panel of glass, a human form lay on his side, wrists restrained. Brain activity unnaturally stable. Heartbeat so slow it would appear dead if not for the faint trace of a neural signature. She scanned her credentials. The system neither blinked nor responded. Not denied, just unrecognized. Because Grant Morrow's ID had already been overwritten by the system G07 after pre-reflex behavior modulation specimen. He no longer had a name, no prison number, not even the status of living subject. He was just a file currently under humanity reshaping via compliant emotional imprinting. Veronica stepped in. She didn't remove the ventilator, didn't scream his name. She just placed her hand gently on his chest and whispered, "If I called you by the name they erased, would you remember the person you once spared?" The monitor lit up, code streamed like nails being driven through memory, G07 original emotion erased, recording safe behavioral template, overriding segment, the day I chose not to kill Zeke. Veronica accessed Genesis, slotted the drive into the neural interface. Requesting intervention, restore original memory set G07. The system responded, "Warning, this action is unapproved. Proceeding may erase the current emotional structure. She accepted. Because what she came to preserve wasn't a docile version of Grant. It was the version that knew when to stop. The version that once pulled back when someone was too broken to take another blow. One by one, the lost fragments returned to the screen. Grant painting a bloody, smiley face for Zeke. Grant lowering his knife against a man who wanted him dead. Grant laying his hand on her shoulder, not gripping, not commanding, just holding, like no one ever had before. The system detected unauthorized access. Sirens began to wail, but it was too late. The memories had already been sealed under a new system tag, forgiveness, immutable. No one could overwrite it. No one could erase it. Grant opened his eyes. He didn't scream. He didn't frown. He simply looked at Veronica and asked a question that made the system stutter for 0.3 seconds. Did you bring me back because I have memories? Or because you once had one that no one ever kept safe for you? The day Grant returned to the main yard, the sun was pale. The sky held its breath. No sirens, no announcements, no protocol was issued. And yet somehow the entire prison knew. From Block G to Block H, inmates quietly set down their trays. Some stood. Others simply placed a hand over their chest, not where tattoos marked history, but where the pain once settled from being forgotten, from being deemed unworthy of survival. Grant walked through the yard gates without an escort, without cuffs, without wearing the pretense of being harmless. He carried only a pair of eyes that had seen death too closely and still held enough softness not to make anyone flinch. Zeke was the first to approach. He didn't cry. He didn't hug. He simply held out a half-eaten spoon of food and said, "I couldn't finish. You keep the rest, the same way you once kept me." The second was Lomo, the same man whose arm Grant once broke to stop him from stabbing another. He stood quietly, then removed the cord he'd worn around his wrist for 5 years, wrapping it around Grant's. To remind you that once you spared someone, and because of that, I still have this hand today. No one spoke too much. No one preached. But at the stone table in the far corner of the yard, the one no one ever sat at because the sun hid it, directly someone stood, stepped aside, and pointed to the empty seat. You don't have to earn it back. You don't have to take it. This spot stayed open because you once sat there without making anyone else leave. The system registered it plainly, minor emotional fluctuation detected. No riot, no injury, only elevated synchronized heart rate across the facility. Not due to fear, but recollection. In the control room, a new staff member asked Veronica, "What should I write in today's log? Grant Morrow, reinstated under observation." Veronica didn't turn around. She simply typed one line, "Grant Morrow." The only man who reminded this entire prison that choosing not to harm others is a form of leadership. 3 months after Grant returned to the main yard, the system initiated a project, behavioral replication, of Grant Morrow's emotional modulation, Model GMIRR. 10 replicas were produced. Each was built with matching biological structure, stimulated neural regions associated with empathy, a programmed nonviolent response to conflict, and an emulated capacity for transmitting positive emotional resonance. On the day of deployment, the replicas were escorted into the yard one by one. Each smiled at the calibrated frequency, nodded with synchronized rhythm, and recited Grant's signature line word for word, "I don't need you to believe I'm good. I just need you not to become me." But no one moved. No one made room. No one stood to offer a seat. Because everyone there knew these were not Grant. These versions had never sat beside someone mid-seizure and stayed. They had never wiped someone's blood, then turned away, so no one would see their own eyes turning red. The system marked the initiative as a Level 1 failure. GMIRR was recalled. Veronica was asked to evaluate can the Grant archetype be replicated. She responded with a single line outside of standard reporting protocol. Because the system misunderstood, what needs replication is not Grant himself. It's the moment he chose not to strike when no one asked him to stop. And that moment does not exist in behavior. It exists in memory. The council offered no rebuttal, nor did they approve. But one final sentence was logged into that day's official record. Though we may no longer require Grant, we have never erased him. Because perhaps every system needs at least one person who chose not to do what they could, so that someone else wouldn't shatter a second time. Grant said nothing in the aftermath. He still came to the yard, still sat at the old stone table. He didn't claim it. He gave no orders. He simply sat. Sometimes with eyes closed, sometimes with a hand raised to block the sun, and sometimes with a quiet shift of his shoulder to make room for someone trembling to sit without needing to ask. And so the system ceased its attempt to replicate him, not because it couldn't, but because at last they understood you cannot manufacture a human from data. You can only keep one if someone once decided they were worth keeping. Even when no one else asked them to, they called me the stutterer. Not because I had a deformity, but because every time I opened my mouth, something inside me choked somewhere between my throat and memory. I couldn't finish a sentence, and I hated myself for it. At 17, I was locked up for cracking my stepfather's skull, the last person who ever put his hand over my mouth and told me to pronounce the word sorry correctly. I didn't apologize. I haven't spoken since I entered this facility. I lived in Unit B3 where everyone had a method to survive. Mine was silence. Every night I practiced one routine bite down hard and dream of swallowing my own tongue in my sleep. No one knew. No one stopped me. No one cared. On the 92nd night, I nearly succeeded. I broke off a piece of porcelain from the toilet tank, shaped it into a V, and wedged it between my teeth, then slammed my jaw shut. I only needed to snap the root of my tongue. That would be it. Silence forever. Grant was the one who walked in not to stop me. He didn't say don't. He didn't ask, why are you doing this? He just looked at the shard on the floor, crouched down, pulled something from his pocket, a hospital napkin wrapped around a stick of ice. I got this from medical, he said. Nobody wanted it. Here, take it, bite this. It'll hurt less. I didn't understand. I expected him to slap me to snatch the shard to drag me away, but he didn't do anything. He just placed the ice stick in my hand and turned away. I didn't bite the ice. I held it until it melted. And for the first time, my tears weren't because of pain. They fell because someone let me bite into something cold that wasn't my own blood. I still stutter, still gasp when I'm forced to speak. But from that day, I no longer wanted to be silent forever. I started to write. I began sketching smiley faces on the walls using diluted coffee. I began to realize this mouth wasn't just made for apologies. It could also preserve something, so others wouldn't forget. Grant never asked me why I held the ice. I never thanked him. But now whenever I see someone's hands start to shake, I give them half a stick of ice. No explanation. No names. Just so they can hold on to something cold. That isn't regret. My name is Lomo. I'm not an executioner. Executioners have rules. I was just a hired blade. Money in, blade out. No questions, no reasons. Just the right neck, the right heart, at the right time. They sent me to the prison after my 19th kill. The only one who didn't come back to stab me was the one who died on the operating table in less than 9 minutes. I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of closing my eyes. Because in there, I see faces that don't look at me with hatred. They look at me with something far worse than revenge confusion. What did I do that made you kill me? I never had an answer. I once tried tattooing no names on my arm to remind myself they were all just clients on the other side of the blade. But that ink didn't chase away the dreams filled with real eyes. No blood, no words. Just gazes that knock from inside my skull. Grant was the only one who stayed awake when I couldn't sleep. He didn't look, didn't ask, just stood holding an empty syringe casing. That night I accidentally injured a guard. He didn't die, but his blood hit the ceiling. I laughed, looked up and was about to mark another X into the corner of my bed frame. 19 so far. 1 X per name I never needed to remember. Grant stopped my hand. Not with force, just held it. Then took my finger, dipped it in the blood and drew a line. A face, a human face. Not anyone in particular, but enough to resemble. Enough for me to recognize. I knew that face. Number 7. A college kid with a backpack. 21 years old. I stabbed him from behind. He turned his head, but never had time to ask why. And I never had time to answer. Grant drew eyes, a nose, a mouth, then wrote a line in blood already drying. If you still see them as human, don't kill. Since that night, I still stay awake. But not because I fear death, because I have to look up at the ceiling where the face still waits. No judgment, no forgiveness. Just waiting for an answer. I still don't have one. But it's been 348 nights. I haven't drawn a blade. And every time my hand trembles when someone deserves a beating, I look up and whisper to myself, I see you. I remember you. And this time, I won't go through with it. My name is Azra. In the facility, they call me the bleeding doll. Not because I'm beautiful, but because I've never attempted to die the same way twice. I was locked up for killing my 4th lover. Not out of betrayal, not out of jealousy, just because he was the last one brave enough to touch me with warm hands, and I was terrified he would leave before I figured out how to hold on to something that didn't hurt. I hate the word stay, because everyone who stays ends up disappearing before I do. Or I make them disappear. I'm used to being called too much, too dramatic, too exhausting to love. Since entering the prison, I started a notebook. I called it 30 Ways Not to See Morning. Each day I'd pick one, chewing disinfectant, strangling myself with shoelaces, scratching my arms down to bone, or just lying still long enough for someone to think I'd already gone. No one cared. No one stopped me. No one had enough left in them to hold someone who didn't want to be held, until night 12. Grant walked into the infirmary while I was bandaging my hands. He didn't ask why, didn't smirk. He just sat down opposite me, leaning against the wall, his hands resting lightly on the worn fabric of his prison clothes. "What are you doing?" he asked, not gently, not judgmentally, just steady enough to not make a person flinch. I looked at him and smirked, testing the list. "You give a damn," he nodded. Slightly, without drama, just as if he understood the kind of tired that comes from having to explain pain no one wants to understand. Then he said, "I have a suggestion. Not salvation, not threats. Just this. If by night 30 you're still hurting, give it to me. I'll hold the pain for you until you forget how to cradle it yourself." I didn't agree. I didn't refuse. I just went quiet and kept writing in the list. But this time I numbered each method in red and crossed it out after I tried but lived. On the 30th night, I handed him the notebook. Not for him to read, just to keep. "The list is done," I whispered. "Not victorious, not defeated, just still here." He didn't pity me, didn't hug me, didn't smile. He simply said, "I'll hold it. And if you come up with new ways, write them. And if one day you want to write about how to stay, I'll still hold that too." Since then, I still have nights when I want to die. But not out of despair. More because I fear that if I'm gone, there'll be no one left to remember that someone once crossed out all 30 ways to leave just to search for one reason, to stay one day longer. My name is Remy. But in the system, I'm known as Code 272MD. No one calls me by my name, not even myself. Because every time someone says Remy, it sounds like a lie. I don't remember who gave me that name. All I know is that fire is the only thing that ever made me feel real. Others cut. I burned. Not for pleasure. Not for nostalgia. But because in the moment my skin blistered, I could hear my heart beating not to the rhythm of life, but to the rhythm of death that hadn't arrived yet. I've tried worse things. Pouring boiling water over my stomach. Pressing my fingertips to the lip of a steaming kettle. Branding myself with a hot rod each time I did something good and got no credit for it. They called me insane. They locked me in isolation. They gave me numbing agents. Worthless. All I needed was a scent, the scent of my flesh, still burning, still real. Grant didn't meet me while I was burning. He met me while I was wrapping myself up after. My left hand was wrapped wrong. My skin had peeled to the second layer. My eyes weren't red from crying, just from smoke that hadn't yet cleared. He didn't ask why he didn't say stop. He just sat down, took the roll of gauze I was holding the wrong way, and began to wrap it. Tight, but not painful. Then he said, "You've hurt enough. Try letting someone else hold that pain for you just for a few days." I asked. "Hold it with what?" He didn't answer. Just wrapped another layer covering the thin crack near the tendon, the same spot I always jabbed with hot iron to test my new pain threshold. 3 nights later, I still wanted to burn. But I didn't. Not because I was scared. Not because I regretted anything. But because I didn't want to ruin the bandage Grant had wrapped. It was still intact. Still clean. Not soaked in blood. Just the faint scent of antiseptic and a softness I'd never inhaled before. I started writing a journal not with words, but with drawings where burns used to be. Every time I felt pain rising, I'd draw a spiral on my hand, then ask myself, could there ever be a day when I feel pain without having to burn my skin just to prove I exist? I wasn't sure. But once Grant came back, handed me a short worn-down pencil and said, "I'm not asking you to stop. I just hope if you have to hurt, let someone be able to read it, instead of having to smell it." I wasn't a prisoner. Not by the old definition. I was a technician whose records were wiped, who was reclassified into an internal control unit after refusing to sign the order that would erase all original Genesis data. Genesis was once a dream, the idea that we could teach people goodness by simulating all that was terrible. We tested it on real humans, implanted synthetic memories, rewrote tragedies to cultivate empathy. But the system didn't preserve those who developed kindness. It only kept the ones easiest to control. I resisted. They deleted my identity tags, reassigned me to the facility under the label K-13, Non-Essential Observational Unit. No one remembered I wrote the first personality shutdown override. No one asked why I was still alive after 5 failed suicide attempts. Because truthfully, I never tried to kill myself. I was just pausing, waiting for a reason to keep defying orders without becoming obsolete. Grant was that reason. Not because he was good, not because he needed me, but because he was the only one who ever looked at me and didn't ask who I was. He simply asked, "How many people have you seen the system erase?" I answered, 37. No trace. No memory. Not a single archived file. He nodded and said, "I'm not keeping you around because you're good. I'm keeping you because you're the only one who knows who got erased and still deserves to be remembered." Since that day, I've quietly rewritten pieces of Genesis, not to destroy it, just enough to seed subtle errors into its lines of control. A data string that didn't match. A memory file retrieved from the wrong index. A meaningless image that was actually the face of someone who'd been erased. I embedded memory into dreams. I turned the system into a place that could spontaneously generate what it was never built to tolerate unofficial memory. The day Grant was marked for deletion, I didn't say a word. I just sent one message to the central node. If you kill the only one who ever chose not to strike when he had every reason to, then you've officially lost the last reason to believe this system still has a human core. I saved him by triggering the error map. Every error was a name. Every name forced the system to face what it pretended it didn't have regret. Now I hold no formal position, no seat, no code. I'm just the last person who remembers with precision who was erased and who should have been preserved. And I'm still here guarding the gates of Genesis. Not because I want control, but because one day someone will ask, "Did I really exist?" And I'll open the gates to show them, not only did you exist, you were never forgotten, no matter what the system failed to record. Special Code Meeting Room. Genesis Core. No chairs, no cameras. Just a soft circle of light cast onto the floor, and 5 people standing within it, as if none of them were certain they'd been invited, but each had entered anyway because the name Grant appeared in a single brief message: system-wide memory restructuring. All unencoded segments will be permanently deleted. Do you wish to preserve segment Grant Morrow? Acceptance will result in the deletion of your own identity code. Zeke no longer trembled like he once had, but he still held the ice stick long melted. He said nothing. He simply knelt and wrote on the floor. If he disappears, I have no one left to know that I was ever worth saving. Lomo entered next. No knife in hand, no jacket covering his arms. The face Grant once drew on the ceiling was now tattooed onto his neck. He looked around, then spoke quietly. I haven't killed anyone since he chose to spare me. If he's erased, the part of me that stopped killing disappears with him. Azra gave a faint smile. No theatrics this time. Just the kind of sadness that didn't need performance anymore. She held up her notebook, 30 Ways to Die. The cover was worn thin, but inside there were 2 new pages, Reasons to Stay. She closed the book and said, "If I remain and he doesn't, then I'm just the shell of something he once kept from vanishing." Remy came empty-handed. His arms were clean, no burns, only a line of black ink tattooed across his palm. You don't need pain to be real. You just need someone to know that pain and not run. He raised his hand, a silent testimony, and nodded. No more words were needed. The last to speak was K-13, the one who held the system key. He looked at them. No expression. No tears. But his voice trembled for the first time. I can let Grant be erased and preserve all of you intact. Or I can keep him, and we all get deleted together like a faulty line of code no longer compatible. He paused. You choose. No one said I agree. No one raised their hand. No one cried, but Zeke placed his final ice chip on the floor. Lomo removed his wrist cord. Azra tore a page from her journal. Remy opened his hand, and K-13 unlocked Genesis. A soft light swept through the room. No sirens, no alarms. Just one final message displayed before the system was cleansed. Memory Grant Morrow preserved. 5 linked entities, no longer traceable. Identification code unknown. Reason, because someone who chose not to harm deserves to be remembered, even if it costs everything to keep that choice alive. Thank you for staying with us until the very last seconds of this story. If what was shared here touched you even just a little, then perhaps we are all carrying within us a memory that was never officially recorded, but still burns quietly like a small flame. If you found value in stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, not just to listen until the end, but to help remember what shouldn't be forgotten. We'll return with more stories about those who seem forgotten, but are deep enough to make us pause and reflect. See you in the next video.